So excited today to be chatting with Kendall Peters, Director of Business Analytics for the Minnesota Vikings. So exciting. We just rounded out a fantastic season. Looking forward to the Super Bowl. Hopefully, everybody's got some fantastic parties planned and some exciting things coming up. But what a year for football. Some amazing things happening. And really love diving into the fact that there is so much data and so much to look into and investigate with what goes on running a professional team. So happy to have you today, Kendall. Really appreciate your time. And also joining us here, jumping into the interview, is Tyler Horner, the head of strategy for Northbeam here. So really excited to dive into the data. We've got a really exciting chat coming up. So Tyler, I'm going to let you take it away.
Thanks so much, Kate. Yeah, Kendall, excited to be chatting. I'm a huge NFL fan, so it's awesome to get this opportunity to chat with you. And we have a lot of football fans at Northbeam, so there was a lot of questions that people are kind of eager to hear about. And honestly, just a lot of people that are analytics minded that just want a little bit of that taste of insight for how the business analytics team at a professional football team operates. So I guess first off, I'm just curious if you could just tell us a little bit about like your story, how you got to this position you're at with the Vikings. It would just be good background for us to have.
Yeah, absolutely. So coming up on 9 years here, but originally I'll try to give you the abbreviated version. I grew up in the southern New Jersey area, a suburb of Philadelphia. Um, and I still get a lot of people that are not happy with me here because I grew up an Eagles fan. So there's been some recent
Cool, that's fair.
conflicts between
Yeah.
the Vikings
Yeah.
and the Eagles. But yeah, actually, I grew up like playing basketball. Went to college for basketball, and when I was there, I was like, yeah, I think I want to do this sports thing, but I had no clue what that meant. Um, and kind of like, it was a small college called Immaculate University, maybe 50 to 100 people, maybe less, coming to games like doing layup lines or something. I'm looking around, I'm like, wow, there's a bunch of people like setting up and doing all these things behind the scenes to make this event happen. And so
Yeah.
that's really where it was solidified in my mind. Like, hey, that's what I could be a part of. Clearly, not going to be a professional athlete.
Yeah.
Um, some further training, some work studies, some internships and things like that. And I took a class in graduate school that was, I think it was called business analytics, but we are just doing a bunch of spreadsheets. I'm like, oh, I really enjoy doing this.
Yeah.
Can I take this into a full-time job in sports? What does that look like? And just went on a lot of informationals and conversations from then, and was fortunate enough to, after that, find an internship with Orlando Magic in their business strategy department, which was doing very similar work. And then from there, turned into an analyst job at the Vikings after about a year or so, and I've been here since.
Awesome. And so what does your day-to-day look like today? What does a director of business analytics at a professional football team like? What does that work look like broadly?
Yeah, so myself and team are responsible for effectively all the consumer data at the Minnesota Vikings. And as you all may well know, the data doesn't matter unless you are turning it into insight, unless you are
Mhm.
changing minds and making better decisions with it. So that's typically what the day to day looks like, and that's done in different paths. Um, Team members of mine start that with data mining, visualization, things like that. For me, it's probably typically, fortunately or unfortunately, more meetings and conversations and talking
Mhm.
about influence and like how do we think differently. And the larger department I'm part of is business strategy and analytics. So even affecting the business strategy, the mission and values to make sure whether you are data forward or not, like this information, this like I call it the glacier of information that we have,
Mhm.
is powering the decision, and it's not just on intuition. So to continue to do that is the path. And I'll give one little nugget. Our department basically didn't exist until roughly 2014.
Mhm.
Um, so while we are approaching 10 years, and it's kind of changed a couple times depending on what the needs of our organization were, it's still a little bit novel. And because of that, there's so much growth and so much like changing of minds that we still think about a lot today, and hopefully it's changed for the better.
100%. Yeah, and I'm kind of along those lines. I'm curious. what is to you, what do you find them to be like the most enjoyable or satisfying part of the job and the work that you do?
I think that changed. There's a lot of challenges. There's a lot of things where like, do we think differently? How do we align here? But
Yep.
there's a ton of examples where we have made change for the better. Some like you can kind of see that light bulb go off in someone's head where you're like, oh, they see it now. And now like the marketing strategy has changed. How we talk to our fans has changed. How we show up for our partners has changed. So countless examples of how that's happened. And like that's what I enjoy the most. And maybe secondly, I would say probably just the curiosity of it. We are fortunate to be on a team where we can like think and create hypotheses and then activate on them and be like, is this true? Is it not? If it is true, how's it going to shift the organization? Instead of sitting and be like, hey, you do these 10 tasks every day. For me, I'll probably get bored. So it changes for sure.
Of course. And just speaking of those examples of interest that really or insights that really changed the business, anything that you'd be able to share in terms of like an anecdote there of something that you guys found in action that you were able to take that actually materially impacted the business?
One of the biggest ones was probably digital ticketing. It sounds like you have a lot of sports fans over there, right? So you've probably seen over the last 10 years, but really maybe closer to 7 years or so, a big shift into digital ticketing. With that comes so much more data. So, we were one of the early adopters at the Vikings with Ticketmaster to do this. I want to say 2017 or 18 was the big year where we leaned in the most and went all digital. Because of that, we took that data, turned it around to our organization, and like a typical assumption. So we're sold out of season tickets. So a standard assumption was like, well, there's 6,000 to 6,000 people in here. They're all season ticket members. Our hypothesis was always that's probably not true, but we didn't have enough information to justify it. Once we went down to the digital ticketing route, we looked at all the transfers, secondary, like all that, did analysis, and we're like, well, actually, it's like a quarter of the building that is season ticket members. Half of the building is transfers, like give the ticket to a friend. Another quarter of the building is someone who bought it on the secondary market. That just stopping there was like, well, do we need to program differently for partners if we're not just talking to season ticket members? Does our game presentation need to be differently if we know every game 8 out of 10 people this is their first time there? So small, we turned it into like high level bullet points and insight, but kind of changed the nature of how we behaved, especially once we got into US Bank Stadium.
No, it's really interesting, and I did actually see a news article about that, and seems like everything went smoothly, which I know is always a risk when you make sort of a big technological change. Kind of along those lines, what do you like? How do you guys think about just like how technology is advancing, and as you try to like fuel these better decision making for for the franchise? How do you think about just like your technology stack and leveraging new technologies? What does that look like?
So we are basically like internal consultants. We're not internal consultants, but we view ourselves that way because we house a lot of the tech stack for the consumer side. So there's probably 3 main sides to that. There's the actual like data warehouse and like where's all the information live. And then there's one that's probably in the middle. For our partners, we have a robust tech stack that helps us provide insight for sales and service and like insights for our partners specifically. And then there's one other area that is more marketing focused, I would say. So we do fall under our broader marketing team. So we do control. We have Salesforce Marketing Cloud as an ESP. We have some other tech stack sources that kind of help with marketing automation and depending that way. So that's generally where we spend our time with, and we always think about optimization in terms of like, okay, how much more do we need to learn about our customers? If we learn this, how is it going to change where we're impacting our partners, where we're impacting our broader fans, where we're impacting people internally with our organization? So Contracts and all that good stuff. But year over year, we try to reassess, like, does this thing matter? And we actually just got rid of a vendor because we're spending way too much money and we're not getting nearly enough insight. So at a high level, that's typically how we approach it.
Cool. No, really helpful. And kind of even stepping back again and just thinking about, you mentioned that I think it was the shift to digital ticketing was around 2017. A lot has happened in the world since then, right? Not, shifts globally, shifts in the macroeconomy. How much does that impact your guys' strategy as it relates to, season ticket sales, merchandise, and concessions? We've had a big shift in the world ever since the pandemic, and there's continued to be, interest rates are high. How does that impact your guys' strategy on a year-to-year basis?
Yeah, we monitor that closely. I will say this. I think we are fortunate in that we are fortunate to be behind the shield of the NFL. We are fortunate to be the Minnesota Vikings. So largely the impact of that has not been negative. For merchandise and concession, we made a switch to a new merchandise vendor. We're with Fanatics for the past year and a half. So we've seen a lot more known sales, but I think that's just due to like the network that they're a part of.
Yeah.
But typically, if you try to make it apples to apples for merchandise and concessions, kind of stays in line with the overall inflation. So it's growing. It's not growing aggressively. It's not detracting for ticket sales and things like that. So we didn't have any fans for our 2020 season, obviously due to local restrictions and things like that. But outside of that, when we've had fans, we've seen the opposite in terms of like economic downturn. People typically lean into sports a little bit more if they can, and for us, they've leaned. We've been able to stay at 99% sold out. We've continued to stay at the highest show rate in the league and button seats and all that. So we've been fortunate because of that. But we kind of monitor and say, okay, if we know that's going to happen, what other decisions are going to impact our fans that we have some control of? So we might even get into it later, but when we think about our season ticket members who have stuck with us through thick and thin, the last thing we want is for them to be like, you know what, you are just gouging us for money. Like, we'll pay it because we really want to be there no matter what, but you're just stealing it from us. So we kind of have different surveys and different ways to monitor that and make sure that we do this at the right balance.
That actually brings up a really interesting point that I'd love to go a little deeper on, which is, obviously there's, you mentioned 99% sold out, and there's been a ton of interest in the team. You guys have been really kind of consistently successful over this last 7 to 8 years. So, how do you think about, how do you guys balance the desire to, obviously, it's a for-profit franchise, right? And you're trying to maximize revenue for the business with that like fan loyalty side. And if you could dig a little deeper on that and like the surveys and how that feeds into that decision-making, that'd be really interesting.
Yeah. There's probably two main areas. We can't control the product on the field that much. I think if we have a sold out stadium and we have very loud people, there is a correlation with like some false start penalties. So like, okay, let's make sure we influence that as much as we can. But outside of that, we can't control as much. Everything else that goes on at US Bank Stadium, we have a big stake in. So we monitor survey scores before, during, and after games. We've done some ethnography and modeled out fan journeys to be like, before you even get here on a game day, like, what are you thinking about? So we have like personas that are like, oh, there's like this group of people who are like, I need to make sure my family's good. I need to get shopping done. And then once I get to the game, then like I turn everything else in my life off and focus on that. So for us, we're like, well, how do we enter that earlier part of your life? You said shopping. We have partners there. Like, is there a way where we can make your life easier? We think about that stuff a lot, but certainly game-based service and making sure people still feel like we're best in class. We want to make changes there if there are deltas. And then lastly, on this, there's like this value piece that we continue to work on. So again, for our STMs, the last thing we want is for them to be like, we're going to pay you, but we feel like you all do not care about us. So we're constantly working through, especially over the past couple of years, how do we continue to to maintain those value scores and grow them. It's through different events and exclusive access that is offered to them. It's through recognition. It's through building a community with them. So those are some of the main things that we're trying to control.
Yeah.
That help us. Again, we can't control the product on the field, but help us maintain our business and know and plan out correctly for the future.
Makes sense. And one trend that we've seen broadly in the marketplace that you kind of mentioned is this trend of like escapism, and people want to come to a game and they want to forget everything else, right? Is there anything that you guys have like leaned into in terms of how you've tailored the fan experience to like lean into that trend and make sure fans, when they go to the game, it really is like an escape and almost like a mini vacation?
Yeah, I mean, I think our game presentation crew is, I would say they're the best in the league.
Mm-hmm.
Others, if anyone outside of me would say, if they're not the best, they are one of the best in the league. Our game presentation, our game experience, like the show that we put on is pretty different from any of the other 31 clubs, and even down to the language. We call it a show. I think most other teams call it like event presentation. So we are really sticklers for that. We have showtime 15 minutes before kickoff, and it's this really immersive experience, especially depending on what game you come into, that's going to hype you up and forget about a lot of other things going on in your life. We used to have pyro in the stadium. Now we have snow. We have fireworks going off. Like, it's really appealing to a lot of your different senses. And then obviously it's all this crescendo into the kickoff and the excitement of NFL football, and typically Sunday too. So that is a big deal, especially as it leads up to the game. But even throughout the game, sticklers to like the timing of what we're putting on the field when there's like timeouts or pauses in between gameplay. We get a ton of feedback on this, and since I've been here, especially since we've opened Just Bank Stadium, none of the feedback has been less than like, wow, this is stellar.
That's awesome. Yeah, I love that. Now I feel like I really need to go to a game there. I'm gonna have to make it over there soon.
We can make that happen.
All right, I love that. So yeah, along those lines, I'm interested to hear. So like, there are certain times where like the beginning of the season was a little bit more challenging, right? And there were some close losses, but every season kind of has its own stories and ebbs and flows. How does that impact, if at all, your guys' strategy, and whether you're focusing on, okay, well, this player is still performing well, so we're going to lean into try to market their merchandise. How if any does that sort of fluctuations between like team and player performance lead to shifts in strategy throughout the season?
Most of that, I would say, doesn't change our strategy too much in season. Now, broader the outlook for the next 1 or 2 years, there's probably an impact. As you know, our quarterback, or maybe if there are non-football fans, our starting quarterback went out for the season. Our star wide receiver missed a ton of games in the middle of the season for things like merchandise. Like, that didn't change anything happening with Justin Jefferson jerseys being sold. So in the vacuum of a season, there's minimal changes, but we know that those can be flags in terms of like, well, next year, do I think I want to renew my tickets next year? Do I think I want to go on average to 3.5 games, or do I want to make it 4.5 or 2.5? So like, those are the things that we are trying to control for. So like I mentioned, STM value, like being really sticklers for that. By the way, I don't know if I said this, STM stands for season ticket member. The in-stadium experience, we try to allude to being like Disney. So when you come in, we want you to feel like this is the greatest place on earth. Sticking to that. And then we are also, something I haven't talked about yet, is like really focused on our brand health. And so if you all are familiar with like YouGov, along with some other studies we do, we look at that, and there's a brand health and brand index scores that we really monitor to see, not only locally but nationally, how are people perceiving the Vikings. some on-field performance and team stuff does impact that, right? Like if you start 0-10, people are going to be like, well, the direction of the team's not great. But everything else in terms of like your satisfaction with how we talk to you, what we represent in your life, things like that, we can still provide a top class experience that way. So like those areas are what we lean into the most and what we test with research and what we want to make sure we show up. We probably lean a bit more locally, at least for now, but even nationally, like how do we make sure when you think of the Vikings, that is what is associated on field matters the most. We want to get that Super Bowl ring too, but in terms of what we can control, everything else, if that is good, we know that on field we'll get there one day.
Yeah. And last question, just to wrap us up, being kind of time. What how does the Minnesota, so like our clients of course are very focused on using media channels, right? Even like Facebook and other social media platforms to try to like get their brand out there, right? Improve those brand metrics and also drive sales. How does the Minnesota Vikings think about like leveraging those media channels, and is that something that your team helps to guide strategy on?
Yeah, we're working through that, and I mean, quite honestly, that's an area where we're trying to make some change. This is my opinion, so I don't want to say it to say anyone else on the Vikings is fully there, but a large amount of our more traditional marketing effort is done through partners in our relationships, which is amazing to have that. However, sometimes if our goals and values aren't fully aligned, how we show up in advertisement, billboard, things like that, might be just a little bit different than we think about holistically. So we're trying to do some work to figure out the correct value prop for partners, sponsors to own a lot of what they already do, but for us ourselves to be like, do we need to take back or do we need to be additive about some of these other areas, and make sure that consistency is done well. So that's where we're at now. I mean, it's probably closer to like the research stage, and then it's probably some of the evaluation of like, does this mean for, do we really want to impact Facebook more and social? Is it out of home ads? Is it more digital? Um, we're still doing a lot of learning on that part. We'll probably put it through like some innovation workshops, but I think that's what's next for us in terms of like our overall, at least to speak for the marketing team, to make sure we are maximizing that output.
That's really exciting. Well, thank you again so much, Kendall. I think these are really interesting insights that the team can take away. So really appreciate you taking the time to share with us today.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate you all having me.